But we're going to jump into our topic today, which is all about what is the title? I have to go back and look at the title. Where is the title to this? See, I don't know where the title is to this. But in any case, I know what it is. Well, I don't know what it is, but I know Devin texted me it, so it's in my text. How to find unknown relatives when you don't have DNA from one of your lines. And there was a video about this earlier. In general, it talked about, hey, how do you find your paternal line or your maternal line from this? But we're going to be talking, oh, thanks. I see some people just put that on there for me to help me out. So we're going to be talking about how to find relatives when you don't have DNA from one of those lines. Now, usually what you're thinking of here is thinking of, hey, you have yourself, and maybe you have your mom's DNA, but you don't have your dad's DNA. Or maybe you've actually identified, through some cousins who your mom's side is, but you haven't really through your dad's side. So you don't have living relatives that you can basically match things up with. So let's go over to this here, hopefully. So this is from Family Search. This is the fan chart with my grandpa right here. And as some of you may know, one of the things we didn't know about was, hey, this line right here. You can see that it changes. Maybe you can see it's probably pretty small on your screen from Garnett to Lee. Let me do the other one. There, that's probably a little bit bigger. You can see that there was a James Garnett, there's a Benjamin Freeman Lee. Turns out that Benjamin changed his name a while back. And so this was one of the cases where we didn't know who this was. All of the living relatives that we knew were me, my cousins, my aunts and uncles. That's it. We didn't have DNA. And so let's go to a different chart to try to visualize what we would need to see. So instead of the fan chart, I'm now going to go to the descendancy chart. Actually, no, I don't want to go to the descendancy chart. I don't want to go back there. I want to go to the fan chart. I want to go up to this James Garnett. And so I'm going to move him to the primary position. And now I'm going to go to the descendancy chart. All right, so we can see here, this is who we have DNA from. This is my grandfather. And if we are trying to find ancestors, what we need to do is we need to identify people who have tested who are also descended from some. So if we just go up one generation, we are looking at Carl Bryant Lee and Ruth Stella Green. Okay? You'll notice that there are some possible people. They had two other children, Freeman and Dean. Now, we actually know who those are, and there's a couple of kids from that, but from a DNA testing standpoint, there was no DNA. And honestly, that wouldn't help too much because we're just looking at who else would be parents of that. Now, if you don't know who those parents are, like for instance, you're adopted, then yeah, anybody that matches that close would be fine. But in this case, we didn't really need to worry about those. What we're looking at is okay, well, what about Carl's brothers and sisters? Now, he had three brothers, Benjamin, Miles, and Martin. Okay, and we won't worry about the green line for right now. But in this case, what we can do is, now this is because genealogy has already been done, so this is just to give you an idea of what was possible here. If we could find, say, any of these people or their descendants. And if you're looking at the birth and the deaths, then they most all of them lived long enough they should have had kids or might have had kids in that case. So if there was any somewhat closely related to Burton, this would be his second cousins. First cousins. Yeah, his first cousins. Sorry, not his second cousins, his first cousins. Because these would be his aunts and uncles' children. And these... Now, when we were looking for this, when we were looking for anything with Burton, there wasn't anybody that was that close of first cousins. So we can effectively eliminate this. Now, what if we had have found is that would have confirmed that Carl Bryant, or not Carl Bryant, who is his dad, but that would have confirmed basically that, hey, now we're able to start looking for this Benjamin and Jane up here. Okay? But like I said, we didn't find any from Martin. We didn't find anything from Miles. We knew some of those people, and actually in some cases their descendant lines actually died off before DNA testing occurred. So we need to go back now to the next line, which is where this was funny, because this is where, well, let me get back to my marker. This is where the mystery was. Benjamin Freeman Lee, who was, we had names of parents. Turns out that those names were sort of partly right. In this case, then, what we're looking for now, since we've eliminated everybody closer as first cousins, we're now looking for anybody who is second cousins. And so you can see that there's this set of people down here that we can be looking at. And that's where we started to actually find some DNA matches. Now, we didn't know that they were there, but what we knew is that, hey, we have some matches that close enough to be second cousins. Well, there was really only two people in this category that it could have been with a second cousin. And so we were able to narrow it down pretty well with that because of that. And what helped is that they happened to have a tree that also went back to this James Garnett and Christina Brandenburger. All right. So that gives you an idea of something that I did. And this is looking at it with the trees all the way there. So let's go through a couple of the principles I was talking about on what we can do, but also what you're going to see in the process. So one of the things that I said is that, hey, one of the things you need to do is make a Leeds chart. And so that's what I'm pulling up here now, is the Leeds chart that I made for Burton. And this is from GEDmatch. I have one from 23andMe, and I have one from MyHeritage. One of the things that you'll notice is I haven't actually updated some of these in a while. Like this one was last updated in 2019. This one was last updated, in 2019. I think this one was updated in 2021. And for Family Tree DNA, I actually haven't made one yet. So I have his DNA on all four of these sites. And I've already gone through and I've made a Leeds chart for this. Now, the goal of the Leeds chart is you want to hopefully end up with 4 columns, 4 colors, and they represent each one of your 4 grandparents. That's the goal. That doesn't always happen. In fact, I would say the majority of time that doesn't happen. So if you've done one of these and you didn't come up with something that was easy and nice like that, don't panic. That's normal. So let's take a look at this Leeds chart here from GEDmatch. One of the things you'll notice is that I've already identified, hey, this is the paternal grandfather line, the Garnett line from my grandpa. I also have a maternal grandmother line, the Harper line. But those are the only 2 lines that I was able to identify from this. Now, there is 2 other lines. I guess let's go scroll down and see. Okay, 4 other lines. So I've got 4 other possibilities with this. 1, 2, 3, 4, which you'll notice adds up to 6 people total. So this isn't going to represent one grandparent each because you don't have 6 grandparents. You only have 4 biological grandparents. Now I've got a paternal grandfather line, so I'm missing a paternal grandmother line. I've got a maternal grandmother line, so I'm missing a paternal grandmother line. Now this was just with GEDmatch. So let me go over and take a look at 23andMe. Now this is about the same time frame that I did this, and you'll notice I've got, I guess one thing here real quick before I go on, don't try to match up the colors between them. I haven't made the colors so that they're uniform between them. So if a line is red on one side, that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be red on the next one. So here, one of the things you'll notice is, hey, I was able to identify that Garnett line, the paternal grandfather. I was also able to identify that maternal grandmother line, a Harper. But because of some of the trees, now 23andMe, MyHeritage, and Family Tree DNA, and Ancestry, all have more trees than what GEDmatch usually has. So that's why I've had more success in identifying some more of these lines. I also tentatively have this maternal grandfather line. So I have both of my dad and my grandpa's maternal grandparents identified. But then you see here, I've got 2 others that I've put into the maternal side because of where some of the matches fit and really because of some of the overlap with those other matches. If I scroll down a bit here, you can see some, let's see here. Maybe there's not a nice overlap on this one. There might not be. I have to go back and look on why I categorized those ones on the maternal side, except that, oh, you know what? I know why. Because 23andMe categorized them on the maternal side, I believe, because of the other matches that I have. So I still have one maternal grandmother that's not, paternal grandmother that's not accounted for, and I don't have another color. So this blue, we never had to get to that because we were able to fill everybody in early enough. So I have a line that is missing from this Leeds chart. And you may have created Leeds charts as well, and you may have found that you have some lines missing. In fact, if you have, then you put it in there in the comments. And that means basically that you've accounted for all of the colors and you have one of your grandparents that is still not accounted for, even though you've accounted for all of the colors. So why could this happen? Let me go over real quick and show you the MyHeritage one. And again, in this case, we've got the Garnett line. We've got 3 of these that we know are on the maternal side, and we have 2 that are unknown as of right now. So between all 3 of them, basically, I've got 3 grandparents pretty well identified, but there's one line, the paternal grandmother line, that is not identified. So let me go back here. So we have the paternal grandmother line. So let's just highlight this because these are the people that aren't showing up in any matches on my DNA. So this might be one of the first things when you're trying to identify relatives that you run into a problem with. If you've done the Leeds chart and you've identified where, 2 or 3 of your grandparents fall in with all those matches, you may have a grandparent that is still missing. And there's several reasons for that. The most obvious reason is, besides you, none of their descendants have tested. So if, none of the siblings of Nancy or Sorelda or Miles, if none of them have tested, then there's nothing to match with. And so you're not going to be able to find that. Now, the other thing is the people that have tested that are related to this line may be further enough back that they don't share DNA with you. And by that, remember, I think last week, or maybe it was the week, not last week, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, but on several of the videos I've talked about, and I think there's one either coming up in this 30 days or it's one that's already happened. But third cousins, you share 90% with. Fourth cousins, though, you only share 45% with. So let's take a look at where first cousins and third cousins would be. So this is the grandparent line right here. So this is the first cousins. So anybody that is in the same generation as you from the next line would be second cousins, which means anybody from this line here is going to be third cousins. So I'm going to highlight this right here. If that is where your most common ancestor is, that's a fourth cousin, and you only share DNA with basically half of them. So there may be some people that have tested that you may be related to, but you don't match in DNA. And so that's why you're not able to match up with them or help find them. Okay? So let us go back to this chart. And let's pretend like we don't know how these people are related. What we can do with the Leeds chart here is, and I've started to do it, or I've done it with some of these, is we can go through and we can look at where each of these people are related. And so what I found from their trees, I'm going to ignore the second line here is how I'm related to them. So just ignore that. And what we have is we can see that, hey, this person is related to this Christina, who is the daughter of James and Christina, through Andrew. This person is related through Christina through Jesse. This person actually happens to be the daughter of this other person up here. So I really have two lines represented. I have an Andrew. Oops, let me go to my blank page to draw this out. I have, helps if I put my marker on. Okay. I have Andrew and I have Jesse. And from both of those, I have some DNA. And I'm just going to put my grandfather over here, Bert, who has DNA. So both of these match them. And I know how these two are related because of their trees. And they are related through a Christina. Okay, so what I've started to do then from this Leeds chart is I've started to create a little family tree of this group. Now, do I know necessarily at this point how Christina relates to Bert? Probably not. But what I do know is I have some information from Bert. Move that over there. I know that his dad was Carl and his dad was Benjamin, most likely. Okay. So in building this family tree, I then need to go and start doing research. I know that, the people in this group on this Leeds chart, they all go back to a common ancestor. Well, I need to now figure out who that common ancestor was. And so I did some research on this Christina. And from that, I found out that, she had parents named James and Christina. I know that they were born in she was born in California, I believe it was, but her parents had moved to California from New York. I knew that she had some siblings, namely a Benjamin and an Esther. And this is after I've gotten this together now, and I've been looking at this. Now it's time to start going and looking at me. Well, these people were all Garnets. And these people were all Lees. Well, what did I know about Benjamin? Well, Benjamin, he was born in New York, but his family moved to California when he was little. What we knew is that his father was probably named James, and his mother was probably named Christina. So right off the bat here, when you're looking at this, we got two families that have a lot of similarities. Now, we didn't know the specific places in California that Benjamin had moved to initially. We knew some places where he lived afterwards, which were not the same places as where this Garnett family lived in California. But the real kicker is when I started to look at the records itself, I could find records of Benjamin up until the 1870s. And I could find records of Benjamin that was related to Christina. I could find records of Benjamin back until the 1870s. So from the 1870s to I think it was 15 when he died, there was records of Benjamin. There was no records that we had of his parents. Well, I could find records of Benjamin, who was related to Christina, that this DNA was, from 1845, when Benjamin was born, to about 1870. And because of that, we know that these two families are related because of DNA. So now it's a matter of how are they related through DNA. And it turns out that they were actually related second cousins through DNA. So we would expect then that their common ancestor would be these parents of Christina, who we had known trees for. And as we start lining everything up, well, Benjamin's parents were James and Christina. Now we, did a lot more research into Benjamin and James in particular to find out some reasons of why Benjamin might have changed his name. And there's some very good reasons of events that happened, and I can't tell it all here because I've told it before. But in 1870, there was some events that happened to James that Benjamin might have been involved in that would definitely necessitate changing a name. And so we had DNA that linked these two families, even though we didn't know who some of the ancestors of Bert were. And because of how closely related they were, we knew that they had to fit into a certain area. And then from doing other genealogical research, as far as places and stuff, it all lined up. Dates and places started to line up together. And that's how we figured out this family, even though we didn't know who this side of the family was. So let me go back over here. So if we go back here to James, and we go back to the descendancy chart, and I'm going to pop open where we know. What we had, let me pop open Christina there. What we had is we had DNA from Bert, and actually we had lots of DNA also from his descendants, but his was the oldest DNA, so that's the one that we cared about the most. And then down here on Christina, I should have popped open some of these. I'm trying to remember where the two kids were, because Christina married several times. Okay, there. So there was this Jesse Andrew, and I don't think the other one is listed on here. That was one of the kids that through him, and actually is through this man, this gentleman right here, John York, who's since passed away. He had his DNA, and matching his DNA with my grandpa's DNA showed them to be second cousins as far as DNA. They shared about 230 centimorgans. Matches like that are great because it really solidifies where in the tree you are. It had to be, within a generation or so of that. It couldn't have been lots of different things like when we have a match of 15 or 20 centimorgans, where it can be lots of different things. And so then from that, we were able to identify who his great-grandparents were. And actually, the names James and Christina were right. We just didn't know that the last name was Garnett and not Lee. So that is one of the real uses then of this is when we're trying to find anybody from any of these groups here. And this is why you can see, for instance, I don't have these colors identified, is as I go down from GEDmatch, I don't have any trees available. And I haven't been able to match them up necessarily on the other sites, at least the last time I worked on this one was. When we go to some of the others here, you can see the reason why when we look at different colors, there's some people within those colors that I have identified. For instance, here's a blue that I've identified specifically of where they fit. There's some other blues, so that's how I know where they fit in that tree, is really by finding who the common ancestors between these blue people are. And then if you have a tree, it's just a matter of knowing where in your tree that common ancestor fits. If you don't have a tree, well, that common ancestor is either your common ancestor or at least one of their recent generations is your common ancestor. So let's go and let's look at some questions here. And let's see here. I got to transition over. I'm going to clear off my screens so that way I can color again in just a moment for some questions if needed. And I'm going to start with Dennis's question that he asked earlier here. And please, when you put your questions in, just put a Q in front of it so that way I know where to look for questions. All right, so Dennis's question, I have a half aunt. How do I prove to her that she is not a first cousin? We have both done ancestry DNA. She shares over 800 centimorgans with me and over 800 centimorgans with my younger sister. All right, so let's take a look at this. So this is, I'll draw some colors here. This right here represents Dennis and his younger sister. Now, he has a half aunt, which if we look, fits right here, 871, that there's some question, at least in his aunt's mind, whether she's actually a first cousin or not, because if you'll notice, hey, a first cousin also shares 866 to 871, about the same amount of centimorgans, which is what she shares with Dennis and her younger sister. Now, I should also point out that that's the same amount that a great aunt or uncle shares. And it's the same that a great grandparent shares. So I think the first thing for anything like this, whether they're known or even unknown in this case, the first way to eliminate potential, ancestors this could be, is by age. And you know what? I just forgot there's another one here that it could be. Half niece, nephew. And when I say by age, this is really just an estimate, okay? What generation are they in? Now, some people might have children really early on in life. Some people might have children really late in life. And if that's the case, then it could throw this off by some amount. But the first thing I think is to recognize is whether this is through a half sibling through the mother or the father. And the reason why that's important is when we're talking about moms, they typically have kids between 15 and 45. There's a time period in there when they can have kids. Now, sometimes you will see some a little bit earlier, not much earlier than 15. Sometimes you will see some a little bit later than 45, but not much later than 45. On the other hand, and this is why this is important to know whether this is through your dad's side or through your mom's side, as far as a potential half-sibling. If it's through your dad's side, or really any relationship, well, they also really can start having kids at 15, but they really can have kids their entire adult life. That's just biology. So you'll notice here that through the mom, yeah, there's a 30-year gap between the oldest child and the youngest child from when the same mom gave birth to them. On the other hand, there's a 75-year gap between the oldest child and the youngest child. So it's entirely possible that you could be 2 or more generations off by just having some going through the dad's line and having a couple of paternal relationships that had kids really early and also had kids really, really late in life. So what I usually do when I do this is I ask myself, okay, when was this self person born? And let's just say that Dennis and his younger sister were born about 1970. Okay? So 1970. Well, now, let me clean this up just a bit. We're gonna start with the mom side, and I'm gonna write 1970 here. And that means that the parents probably 25 years earlier. So 1970 minus 25 is going to be 1945. Okay? And the grandparents then 25 years before that is going to be 1920. And by the same token, we can also add years. 1995. And we don't have to get too far before we run out of possibilities because those times haven't happened again. So these years sort of represent the rough generation when these people might have been born. So we have somebody who's wondering, hey, am I in the half aunt or am I in the first cousin? Well, in this case, the first thing I was to take a look at, when were they born? And let's say, for instance, they were born in, let's make this difficult for us, 1960. Okay, 1960 is not any one of these numbers. 1960 happens to fit right in between these numbers. All right. So this is when we've got to start using some logic, but also, where is the real possibility? So for instance, if these parents were born in 1945, well, 1960 would be 15 years old. That's on the tail end, very beginning of when you might start seeing kids. So if it was a first cousin, then you might be expecting that there's a relationship that one of the parents had a child at 15 years old. On the other hand, if we go back one generation to 1920 to 1960 is 40 years old. Now, it's on the upper end, but it's not at the extreme upper end. And particularly if people were having multiple kids, throughout their life in that time frame, then that 40 years old might fit right where that half aunt is. So you have an extreme case in this case where, hey, that 15 years might be where that first cousin is, but a more logical case to be made of where that half aunt is. So that's an initial test of when I'm trying to peg where people are. But that doesn't necessarily prove that that is where they fit. So what else then can we do to show where somebody is? Let's get this erased and start it up again. So again, this is Dennis and his younger sibling. Oh, we can just color the sibling right there because it's right next to it. But in any case, so Dennis and his younger sibling. So the next thing is, from a logical standpoint, to actually just figure out, okay, from a relationship, and who do we know? If this is the first cousin, does Dennis and his sibling know who their parents are, or who the common parent, at least one common parent they'd have to have? Do they know that? If the answer to that is yes, do they then also know who the grandparents are? Okay. And if the answer to that is yes, okay, does this first cousin know who their mother or father is? If the answer is yes, then you really should have your answer already. Because if this mother or father is a sibling to one of Dennis's parents, then it's a first cousin. It has to be. If, on the other hand, this parent is actually one of the grandparents, then it has to be a half aunt or uncle. Okay? So that's knowing, that is if you know who these, at least, you know, one of these lines, or hopefully both of these lines, their parents are. But that's not always the case, right? And usually if there's a question about this close of a relationship, I would guess that there is some confusion as far as who the parents or who the grandparents are. So let's start here with these siblings. And Dennis doesn't say whether this is a full sibling or a half sibling. In this case, it doesn't matter because they share at least one parent. And that parent is also related to either that half aunt or this first cousin, the same person that we don't know whether they're a half aunt or a first cousin. So then how could we determine whether they were a half aunt or a first cousin? And this is where your other DNA matches come in. Do you have anybody over here that are half first cousins? Or do you have anybody over here that are first cousins once removed, or second cousins, things like that? Because this is where now we need to go and take a look at this shift that happens. Okay? These relationships on this chart are all in relation to yourself. So let's clear this out, and let's now move. I'm just going to call it the aunt for right now, even though it might be a first cousin. Well, if this is an aunt, then where does Dennis, this is Dennis and Dennis's sibling, fit in? This would be the half aunt. But if this was a first cousin, then this is where Dennis and that half sibling would fit in. Now, the reason why I highlighted those is because how much DNA does this half aunt or potential cousin share with this group of people and with this group of people? And you see that it's different. What we've done is we've actually shifted this down and over in order for this to happen. Before, we were looking at these amounts up here that share with Dennis, but now we want to look at these amounts that share with this half aunt. And so what you need to do in order to determine it for sure, if you don't know who your parents and grandparents are, is you need to pull in some of these other relationships in order to figure out who a further known ancestor. Maybe you're going back to identify who the common great-grandparent is and how these relationships are related, and then how much you share with them to give you an idea of where you fit on that great-grandparent scale. So there's 3 methods, depending really on how much information you have. Usually, you try to use all of those together to triangulate, I guess you could say, onto a specific relationship from this. So Dennis, I hope that answers your question a little bit. Maybe it might be that this half aunt, I'm suspecting that you're fairly certain it's a half aunt. So perhaps she doesn't understand that first cousins and half aunts share the same amount of DNA with you. Okay, I have the DNA test results for me and my 2 siblings. Can I recreate the DNA for my deceased father who did not test? And the answer to that is sort of. What you can use is you can use I got to put my marker up. If you have them on GEDmatch, there is a tool called Lazarus that you can create what your dad's DNA might have looked like. And even, if your father has, or if your mother hasn't tested, you could even create some of hers. Now, how this works is you, being the first child, you only got 50% of your dad's DNA. Now you got a sibling, so we'll say that's the second child. Well, they also got 50%, but only 25% of that is unique from what you have. So really, by adding these 2 kids, you get about 75% of your dad's DNA, roughly. And then we add a third child. Well, they add another 50%, but you can probably see this pattern here. It's only about 12.5% of that DNA. So overall, in general, with 3 siblings, you have total about 88% of your dad's DNA. Now, when the Lazarus kit, is it going to create something that's 88%? No, because there's a lot of places where everything's the same and it can't really distinguish it, because what we really can do to figure out is what is unique. So for instance, you have every place you have 2 alleles, 2 letters. Now, if in that location you have an A, well, we know automatically that, hey, one is from your mom and one is from your dad. We know that right away, okay? Well, the problem comes in, what if you have a C? Which is from your mom and which is from your dad? Now, with just siblings, we're not going to be able to tell. And so it's places like this that, yeah, you have your dad's DNA there, but it doesn't know which one is your dad's DNA in that place. So it's not going to be able to assign that to either your mom or your dad. Now, if you happen to have your mom's DNA, then we can do something. Okay, so let's look at this again. Let's say that you have AA. Well, we know that, let me move this to the center so I can do a dad over here and a mom over here. Okay, but the next location you have an AC. Now, if your mom was an AA because you have her DNA, well, then that clearly means that, hey, this has to be the mom over here. On the other hand, if your mom was a CC, well, that means then that your mom is over here. But what happens if your mom is also an AC? Well, in that case, we don't know which one she passed on to you, so we don't know which one to assign to your dad. So just having your mom's DNA doesn't mean that we're going to resolve all of these, but it means that we'll be able to resolve some of them. So there'll still be some places where you don't have it, and that's why you don't get that full 88% or what you want to call it for this. I've done a video on the Lazarus kits, and what I have found is about 50% is the maximum that you're going to get. It's better than nothing, but it's not very good. And that's not the fault of Lazarus. That's just the fault of the fact that all of these letters don't come with a tag saying, hey, I'm from your mom, I'm from your dad. Okay. I hope that answered your question, D-looters. Let's see. Okay. Lynn, you got a good question here. Lynn asks, can an adopted female find her biological father using DNA from a downline granddaughter of the potential father? Ooh, this is good because this is one that we should draw out. Okay, so we have... I've got to always remember to put on my marker here. We have, and we're just worried about the father in this case. So squares the father, circles the daughters or the females. So we have a child, and there's a couple of different ways that this relationship could happen, depending on what we know. So it might be that there is another partner involved, and we're looking at a downline granddaughter. Or it might be that there is a sibling involved, and we're looking at a downline granddaughter. Okay? Either one works fine. It's just a matter of knowing what the relationship is and how you are related. So in this case, this adopted daughter, she would be the aunt on this side. So if this is the granddaughter's DNA that we're using, she would be an aunt. On this side, almost the same relationship, she would be a half aunt. And the nice thing here is these have different amounts of DNA. So if we go back, we can look here and we can see that an aunt between 1,200 and 2,200 centimorgans is what we're expecting. Most likely it's going to be somewhere around 1,700, 1,800 centimorgans. Whereas a half aunt is between about 500 and 1,300, most likely around 800 or 900 centimorgans. You will notice that there's a small bit of overlap between about 1,200 and 1,300, but those are going to be rare cases. So if you do have this granddaughter's potential father's DNA, and they fit into one of these, then that's a good point that you have identified who the father is. Now, I'm assuming since you're just asking about the biological father, you might have already figured out who the biological mother is, which would be helpful as well, because that would also be able to, pinpoint exactly where they fit in the family tree. All right, Sweetie Pie. Good question here. What do I do if someone changed their names for, say, they were in protective type of government service? So that is an excellent question. And it's a question that is, hasn't really had implications until now. So the first thing I would say is, and I'm not sure if the government does this now in the last 10 years or 15 years, but if you're in protective, custody of government service, then I would hope that the government that's watching over you, protecting you, lets you know, do not take a DNA test for any reason. If your DNA is not out there, they can't match with you. Okay? If because of the protective custody, they've cut off all relations with other family members, then they can't find you, in theory. Other than that, as far as research into protective custody, I'm not sure, one, if there's any records that you would actually be able to tell. The only records I could think of that really would be helpful or actually show this is if the person in protective custody actually said something or did something. Maybe they post on Facebook about their mom or show a picture of their mom. Don't say her name, but that picture can be found somewhere else on Facebook, which actually gives her name, and you can find something like that. I mean, the whole idea from this is that you're changing the identity of somebody and keeping them separate from a lot of places and people, so that they're not found out by the wrong people. Interestingly enough, when I lived in Canada, in Vancouver, I found out that there is an extraordinarily large number per population, and so now we're talking like, a couple of dozen or so, of people that are in protective custody for the U.S. government that live in Point Roberts, Washington at the time. They might have changed it since then, but at the time, that's what it was. And you might be wondering, well, why this one little town in Point Roberts, Washington? That is because if you look at geography, Point Roberts is right on the edge of a peninsula, which everything else is part of Canada. So in order to go there, to find this person, you not only have to cross the Canadian border once, but then you have to cross back into the U.S. So you're not only going through Canadian Border Patrol, but you're going through the U.S. Border Patrol. And I think they don't even have like a high school there, so the kids there basically have to drive through the country, drive through another country just to get to school back in Washington. So from a secure place, it's pretty secure in that you have to cross 2 international borders just to get there. So that would be my other suggestion is, if you know that somebody is in protective custody, go look in Point Roberts, Washington. That's probably, a good place to start. Okay, let's see here. DB says they got their question kicked out. I don't know how they got their question kicked out. I did not see it, but let's keep on going. Gene Dawson, you say you have a question that's longer than 200 characters. Then, yes, if you want to email us, info@familyhistoryfanatics.com. We always take cases as far as for a DNA deep dive in that. So if you have a good question that's longer than that you want us to look into, then send us to that in an email, info@familyhistoryfanatics.com, and you will be able to we'll be able to get that for you. All right, Eva Olsen. I hope it's Eva, or if it's not, it's Eva from Sweden, I remember. Can I get my father's Y haplogroup if I have my mother's and my Y DNA? Not my Y DNA, my DNA. So, Eva, or Eva, I'm assuming that you're female based off of your name and the picture that you have there. And as such, you don't have a Y chromosome. Because the haplogroup, the Y haplogroup, is based solely on the Y chromosome, then no. Unlike with Lazarus, where we can recreate some of that DNA, for instance, if you had 3 daughters and you were trying to create your father's DNA, you would not be able to recreate any of the Y DNA because you guys didn't get any of that. So in this case, no, you wouldn't be able to figure out your father's Y haplogroup. But let's go back to a family tree and see what we could do instead. So, Eva, I'm assuming that this is you right now. Okay? We don't have your father. I'm assuming he's deceased, so we can't get the haplogroup from your father. But if your father had brothers, well, they would be the same haplogroup as him, as long as they are brothers with the same father. If your father, or let's say none of those brothers are living, well, they're children. They're male children. So these would be your first cousins. So if you have any first cousins that are male on that male line, they would also have that same haplogroup. So again, you're following the males all over. So it doesn't matter if this is first cousins or if this is second cousins. Oh, I'm not seeing the chart. Thank you. I didn't transition. Let me redraw this closer here. All right, so Eva, this is you in the center. Okay, don't worry about these down here because these are all your kids and that. We don't need to worry about that. But you don't have your father, so we can't get a haplogroup there. But what we can do is we can look, does your father have any brothers? So let's change this up and go to him. And now in this case, I'm looking at Carl, and I'm assuming here that Carl is your dad. Carl has been deceased, but we can see here that, oh, there's Martin, there's Miles, and there's Benjamin that all have that same Y DNA, which means their kids, their sons, have that Y DNA also. These would be your cousins, your first cousins. They also have that same Y DNA. So your haplogroup is going to be the same. You can do this going back each generation. So if we wanted to go back to your second cousins, well, we'd be looking at his father, and we would see that, hey, there's Benjamin. Well, that's your line in this case. So it's not this line because we might have exhausted that, but there's this other line over here, James. Now you'd have to go down probably 2 generations to find your second cousins, the male ones, that you're related all through these male lines back to this great-grandfather. If that's the case, then they also have that same Y DNA. So if you just have the DNA from your mom and yourself and your female, there's no way to get that Y haplogroup for your dad. But if you have brothers, if you have male first cousins through that father's line, male second cousins through that father's paternal lines, that haplogroup, any one of them testing, that haplogroup is going to be the same as what your father's was. Now, if we go back several generations, then we might get into where there's been a haplogroup change, but it'll be on the same branch. All right. Stacy asks, are there going to be any DNA workshops coming up? So yes, there was not a winter of DNA this year in January like I normally plan. And there wasn't a workshop at the end of the year because we've had a really hectic year. But I have been getting a workshop together on combination of, because they sort of go together, chromosome painting, using DNA Painter, chromosome painting and how that can help you, and visual phasing, because visual phasing really is a way of chromosome painting. We're going to be going through all the different ways of visual phasing. We're going to be going through some of the techniques on chromosome painting. And for those who sign up for it, what I'm going to be using for this workshop is I'm going to be using several different participants for each of the different phases. We'll be using several different participants' data. So if you happen to have siblings that have tested, and you want to have yours, and it doesn't matter if you just have one sibling, or if you have a half sibling, or if you have 3 or 4 siblings, that's all fine. We're going to be using that so that way you can see some live data. There'll be a chance for people to be able to work on this themselves. So I'm in the process of getting that together. It is probably going to happen in late January through February. Probably be a 4-week, I think, workshop for that. So be on the lookout for that as it's coming forward. All right. Okay, Nellie, would my brother's haplogroup be the same as my brother's? Would Nellie, you're asking, would my brother's, maybe okay, there, thank you for correcting that. Sorry, would my father's haplogroup be the same as my brother's? As long as he is their father, yes. Because that Y DNA went directly from him to them. And so that's what's being looked at to identify that haplogroup. So yeah, in fact, on 23andMe, I'll pull this up real quick here and show you. Let me transition this over. So 23andMe, one of the really cool things that they do here is, where is my wife? So my wife has tested, But her mother and father had already died before we did DNA testing. But look at this, because this is cool. It tells her paternal haplogroup. Now, why is that? Because her brother has tested. And what it is it's identified them as full siblings, which means they have the same father, they have the same mother, and so her paternal haplogroup is the same haplogroup as her brother, even though she doesn't have any Y DNA. So, absolutely, Nellie, your brothers, if they're the same, have the same father as you, that haplogroup is going to be the same. On the same topic, Lewis McLeod asks, how often does the Y DNA change through the father's line? So I would have to go into some of the research on this, but basically there's going to be some very minor changes. We're talking a couple of letters or so, just from a father to a son. Whether we actually test for those changes is the question. Now, normally, to give you an idea, so the Y chromosome is what, about 40 million letters long or so, 40 million letters. And we look at, in most of these companies, when they're looking at the Y chromosome, they're looking at about 2,000, maybe 5,000 of those letters. I think Living DNA actually looks at about 22,000 of them. But in any case, you're looking at just a small number of those letters. Now, most of those letters don't change, but there's still a lot that could. So what we have found is that if you saw the latest announcement for Family Tree DNA, there's about 50,000 branches on the Y DNA tree. 50,000. Basically what that means is in essence, there's 50,000 haplogroups or subgroups of that. And that is for all of the people, on the earth that have tested right now, which is only about maybe a couple million as far as Y DNA testing. Each one of those changes, minimum, has to represent a single generation. Okay? It's very rare that you would have two changes happen in a single generation. So 50,000 changes, or 50,000 branches, but a single generation, and remember, these are all branching, it really doesn't represent that much. From most of what I've seen, you're looking at an actual change in haplogroup maybe every, at the quickest, I guess you could say, about 4 generations. So you, your dad, your grandfather, and probably your great-grandfather, for certain, almost certain, all have the same haplogroup once you look down to the branch. What you're going to find maybe then is by the time you get to your 3rd or 4th or 5th great-grandfather, they might be one step above on that branch. Not necessarily very far, just one step above. But this is one of those things that, as far as research is going, is actually expanding quite a bit right now. So to give a really definitive answer, really couldn't tell you. There's some rough estimates about how it is, but when you're looking at it practicality, this is really the first time in history that we've been able to see large amounts of Y DNA to get a feel for how things might be changing. All right. Anna Corinne, is there a way to make clusters of matches who match both me, my half-niece, and my half-cousin? Yes, there is. So what you need to do is you need to go and get that shared match list between you and your half-niece. Okay? So that'll give you a list of people. Let's say 50 people that you and your half-niece match. Maybe if you're on Ancestry, it'll be like 300 or 400. That's the easy part. Then comes the hard part. What you need to do then is you need to go through your half-cousins matches and see which of them match your half-cousin. And so you're going to be basically keeping some and eliminating some others. Sometimes, depending on how many matches you're talking about, it could be time intensive. But it starts with the shared match list, but then the other part has to be manual. All right, Sandy, why does my DNA and my nieces show that she is my first cousin? Let's go back here to DNA Painter and show you. And let me move over. All right, so you and your niece. So here is you, and here is your niece. Why is it showing that she is my first cousin? All right, so I'm guessing that this is a full niece, which is why you have the question, because you'll notice here, if it is a half niece, well, they share the same amount as a first cousin. So then the question is, well, why would this be showing it? Well, it has to do with this range. And my guess is that you fall on the low end of the range. And so what their algorithm is using is it's using, okay, it's about here, but it's also looking at how many segments that it's possibly, man, this is all statistically, you know, a bell-shaped curve. And so really what it is you're falling probably on the low end of this. You're unique. You're not one of the people that's just in the middle like most of us. Your relationship is unique in that way, which might be why that company is reporting it as a first cousin. I believe in most of the websites, you can actually go in and correct that and say that, hey, I know who this person is. She's my niece, not my first cousin. And that's going to be fine. So Sandy, I hope that answered your question. DB, you wanted the email address. It is info@familyhistoryfanatics.com. I'll type that in here. Info at All right, so it is 10 minutes after, which is a little bit longer, but we always, are more than happy to go a little bit longer. Again, if you have any longer questions, or if you have like a case study that you would like us to do, both for either DNA or even just a genealogy deep dive, or if you have a writing for one of our writing deep dives, a writing sample that you would like to send and have us critique, help out, do some research on for you, then please, you can go ahead and send that to the email address I put in the chat, info@familyhistoryfanatics.com. If you are not a member of FHF Extra, it is just $2.99 a month. And welcome to Diane Farmer, who just joined while she was watching today. What you get from that, because we put out videos on YouTube every week. We also, for our members, each month we have an extra live stream, and it's focused really on what those members want. So it's a great time that, hey, if you want an hour of free research, then send us an email with what it is, and we can do that as part of one of those live streams. Nellie asks, how do you become a member? There's a join button somewhere below me. I'm not sure which side over here. And you just click on join, and it's all through YouTube there. Like I said, it's $2.99 a month. And the other thing that we do is we also do a webinar each month, just for members. All of those live streams and all of those webinars are still available for our members. Plus, we have probably 100 or so other webinars from some of the places that we have gone and taught at, that were recorded, that we put on there. So it's a great value for basically $36 a year. You get an extra 100 hours plus another 25 hours every year of more DNA training. And Andrew just joined, so he found the join button. Thank you, Andrew, for y'all's support. But yeah, we enjoy doing this. And Nellie's on an iPad, so she doesn't see it. I have no idea. We don't use iPads, so I don't know, that it might be hidden in some other place. But take a look around. One of the things for members that you'll see on the chat is you'll see that there's a little leaf with a number in it that helps tell you about how long people have been. The 4 means They've been a member for just over a year, I believe it is. I think the next one is a 5, which we'll have some people with 5s coming up. And you can do that. So yeah, you can hit the join button on any one of our videos, and it will allow you to join. Also, just watching our videos, sharing our videos with other people helps out too. We really appreciate it. So we are, yeah. Devin, would you normally say something? We are going to log off. We'll see you. I think our members webinar is next. Actually, our live stream / webinar is next week, next Saturday. We're doing a 2-hour combined webinar live stream. If you have questions, send them in, because there'll be a big, Q&A portion of that, as well as some training on one of those topics as well. Quick question from Ellison. Can I upload a synthesized DNA from GEDmatch Lazarus to my heritage or family tree? No, you cannot. You can't actually download anything from GEDmatch. All you can do is upload the DNA files from other places onto GEDmatch. Yes, and so members, if you've just joined and you don't know, go to our website. There is a members section which will have links to the videos. It's organized in a different way, so if you're trying to search for certain types of videos, then it's there. I believe there's playlists set up that are members only playlists as well. And Spartan Chuckles, thank you for joining as well. All right, so with that, I will end. Thank you all very much for coming, and I hope we answered some DNA questions and you learned something from it. And our members, I look forward to seeing you next Saturday. And if you're not able to make it, don't worry, you'll be able to see it on the replay. All right, now I got to figure out how to stop everything.